Okay, everybody, welcome back to California history. I keep saying I'm going to reuse videos that I had already recorded from previous semester, but every time I go back and find something about it that I don't like for each video, I don't know, we're all our own worst critics, and I'm like, oh, there's something wrong with this, and I find some excuse to just keep re-recording these over again, even though it's probably almost like exactly, it's not like I'm doing some amazing job in each one of these that, is it ever going to reach some sort of perfect state with these videos? I'm still going, and and doing all that throughout every video anyway. So anyhow, we are finishing up with the Spanish era. This is a short kind of transitional lecture between the Spanish era and wrapping up some loose threads of this before we get into the Mexican era, which is a pretty short time as well. So I left off talking about, the last lecture was all about life at the missions with the Franciscans and the neophytes, the relationships that they had and everything, and that sort of complicated morass of morality over there. 2 lectures ago, though, I had said Gaspar de Portola, who was a military officer, I believe he's a captain, who was made the secular governor of California, not just Alta California, but Baja California as well. And he was ordered to build his capital in Monterey, which at first was their furthest north settlement. But this is before they started building on the San Francisco Peninsula, way before up in Sonoma, which is the most furthest north mission that they build. But he's, from all the way up there, he's the governor of both Alta and Baja California. But he doesn't like California very much, and he's going to look for any excuse to get out of here as quickly as he can. And one of the problems that he's having is kind of constantly butting heads with Junipero Serra. Their missions are a little bit different. Portola, is taking this in the Spanish Empire military perspective of protecting this new settlement, the expansion of this empire across the globe. Junipero Serra is thinking about the natives, and these people that they see that they need to protect and sort of foster along, on a very sort of individual level to bring into this new Spanish civilization. So their missions are a little bit different in a way. And they're going to butt heads over that. One of the things, that I had already mentioned was really one of the things they're always fighting about is the treatment of Native women. Like I said, the Franciscans feel the need to protect them from the soldiers who, were known for sort of having their way. Portola and the rest of the military officers are kind of like, oh, what's the big deal? Soldiers be soldiers. That's kind of a thing that soldiers have always done throughout time, which is true, but it doesn't make it okay. So that's one of the things that they're always butting heads over. And it was enough that Junipero Serra, he finally does make it up to Monterey. He started building up in his first San Diego mission. He does finally take a boat. His leg is getting worse and worse as he gets older. So he agrees, okay, I don't need to walk all the way up to Monterey. I'll take a boat. And he's going to try and build his sort of capital mission in Monterey as well. But just a few months into construction there, they, the sort of conflict in their mandates, butting heads, Sarah's just like, forget it. I don't want my cathedral that I'm building to be, or my church to be on this military base. So he goes a little bit further south from Monterey, and it builds what they call becomes the mission San Carlos Borromeo del Carmelo, which we know today as Carmel. And this will be these sort of twin cities down on this little peninsula, on this bay, on the Monterey Bay. They're the military base of Monterey, Carmel, which begins as this religious sort of haven. And that's sort of treated, that's Sarah's sort of base of operations for the rest of his life, even though he's constantly traveling up and down to all the missions around California. But like I said, he's gonna, or Portola is gonna try and get out as quickly as possible. He puts his second in command and said, "You're governor now." A guy named Pedro Fregas. Fregas didn't go along with Serra very well either. It was bad enough that Serra even traveled all the way back to Mexico City just to get Fregas replaced. To argue like, "Oh, this guy's the worst. I can't work with him." And Serra had enough clout that he was able to do that. So they put in another governor, and Serra doesn't get along with that guy either. Well, you can't just keep replacing people. You're gonna have to learn how to get along. So eventually, they're able to manage. But after building Carmel, Serra will build 7 more missions. Ends up over the next 14 years. He ends up building a total of 9 missions in California. A couple things I found interesting too. During the American Revolution, Serra took a collection from all of the Franciscans throughout the state to send to George Washington. They sent George Washington $137 as a donation, essentially. And I read on a thing once, a little scribble in a book at Mission San Juan Capistrano that one of the friars had said, we wish the best for General Washington in his fight against the British. And they were, for whatever reason, we don't know exactly why they were pro-American. It's a very different cause. It's not like they were like pro-democracy or anything like that. Maybe it's just the British were very much a rival to the Spanish. So anything that gives the black eye to the British, they consider to be a good thing. But $137 for guys that have taken a vow of poverty, and back then that's quite a bit of money for them. But anyway, in 1884, at age 70 years old, Serra dies and is buried beneath the floor of the Mission Carmel. Like I said, the debate is still raging on today about making him a saint. For a long time, he was thought to is very lauded within the Catholic community, being like, oh, he risked his life to come and bring civilization to these native people, and it's so dangerous, and he did it anyway, and he was so compassionate, and they wanted to canonize him to make him into a saint, but it took a little too long into the modern era, into the 20th century, when native groups were able to basically protest, saying that you can't do that. The things that he did to us. Yes, he did that because he said that he loved us, but if you punch somebody in the face and tell them that you love them, the punch still hurts. So yeah, that's that. So one of the things I also got to squeeze in here that I've mentioned a couple times is the Russian settlement in California. This was like the whole reason that the Spanish started building in California when they did. Like I said, their fear of how quickly the Russians were making their way towards California ended up being, pretty unfounded. The Russians were not moving that fast, and they didn't really have that much interest in California. But it is worth mentioning a little bit because their experience, the Russians had come over from across the Bering Sea, from Siberia. Alaska is right there. So they had crossed, the same way that people had originally got into California, or, into the Americas to begin with. They had crossed over from Russia into Alaska and made their way down. That's pretty much what the Russians did. And their experiences are kind of similar to what the Spanish were going through, as far as they were also trying to preach to the native peoples in Alaska. But of course, rather than Catholicism, they're teaching them Russian Orthodox, separate sect of Christianity. The natives there also did not particularly like it very much. They had quite a bit of resistance. Apparently at one point they even had kicked, the natives had fully pushed the Russians out of Alaska. It is a sort of strong independence movement, but the Russians pushed back. And for a long time, that area was known as New Russia. And they were slowly working their way down to, there was modern British Columbia down the West Coast. The only, as far as they ever get in California, was Western Sonoma County at Fort Ross, which is still there today. It's a place you can go visit. I recommend it if you're in that part of the world, for sure. There's not a lot of reasons to go, along the coast of Western Sonoma County. It's kind of remote, but it's gorgeous out there. You should totally go. You can go to Fort Ross, and you can bring your dog. It's dog friendly, which I liked a lot. But this was essentially just a fur trapping settlement. They weren't trying to preach to the natives. They weren't trying to, this wasn't a military invasion force or anything like that. They built this fort in 1812 and, in 1812. And the most people they ever had living there was 128. And only 26 of those were Russians. That was, the bulk of the Russian presence. And over 100 of the people that were living there were natives. So they had good relations with the native people because they were basically just trading. When I said this is a fur trading settlement, essentially what that means is they're out there to club seals, sea lions, for their furs. They're out there killing cute ocean mammals to skin them and send back to Russia. Speaking of a cute animal I wouldn't mind skinning sometimes. I know, I'm just kidding. I love her. They're only going to be there for until 1841, and then they pull out. And actually, we don't know the name, or at least I don't know the name that the Russians called it. I think it was just known as the Russian American Company Fort, whatever that is in Russian. But Ross, everybody else called it Fort Rus, as for Russian, and eventually that sort of changed into being Fort Ross. Is there anything else I want to say on that subject? I don't think so. One of the interesting sort of alternative histories I always wonder, if say back in the 18 teens, somebody, some Russian had reason to leave the fort and head eastward, and somehow, made it to the Sierra Nevadas and discovered gold, then they would certainly be putting in a lot more resources here to be able to mine that gold. The Spanish would have found out about it. They'd be putting more resources in. We would basically have a war over California, long before the gold rush, way before the Americans were anywhere close to being able to come to California. You would have these two great world empires fighting a war over the gold over California. And who knows what the world would look like then. I don't know. It's one of those sort of alternative histories that I just, historians just like thinking about that kind of stuff, even though we're not supposed to admit it. So anyway, Russians were never a real threat to California, but that's not to say there were not other external threats. There were other people who wanted to get into California. And in fact, in 1818, California was conquered for a total of 6 days. An occupying force basically took it over. And I'll let you now think about, guess who conquered California for 6 days. Maybe it's the English, maybe it's the French, definitely not the Americans. It's Argentina. That's random. Yeah, Argentina. But actually, before it was Argentina, a year before they became Argentina, it was the United Provinces of Rio de la Plata. And one of their privateers, waving this flag, sacked Monterey and pillaged everything out of there, and then made his way down the coast, taking everything that wasn't nailed down, pretty much. And this is not necessarily a super important part of California history. I just think that it's kind of interesting, and it was for people that lived in California at the time, they were terrified of Hippolyte Bouchard, like he was, and what he would do to them. And Bouchard was French originally, and uh, Rio de la Plata, where Argentina is now, really far down on, down South America, far from the seat of power of Spain. They had that area had broken away from Spain. It was one of the first to sort of like declare independence, and it became sort of like a haven for people that were sort of unhappy with the other world empires. They got a bunch of Spanish, Portuguese, French, English, all kinds of these people that are discontent with the way that their empires are being run, that wanted to start like kind of a new, somewhat modeled after the United States, but even more sort of international than that. Uh, and this was sort of the birth of what becomes Argentina. And Bouchard was a French naval commander, unhappy in the Napoleonic era. He joins up with Rio de la Plata. He becomes a privateer because, like I said, if you're part of a smaller navy who's out there uh, trying to fight against bigger navies, you can't go ship for ship, cannon for cannon. You have to go out and sort of pillage and bring stuff back to, let your people get richer in the meantime. And that's basically what we did for California, because California, there's barely any troops here. When he took Monterey, there was barely anybody there, and the soldiers that were there just retreated. They saw his warship come in, and they just took off. And he just, like I said, takes everything that isn't nailed down, burns most of what is left in Monterey, and heads south. He goes to attack. I think this is another great story. He goes to attack Santa Barbara, which is the next Presidio down to the south, and they avoid attack by pulling a trick that seems like it would be from like Looney Tunes or like some sort of like slapstick comedy kind of thing. So they only had like a dozen guys at this fort in Santa Barbara protecting this, and they knew the pirate Bouchard is coming down, and they could see that his ship offshore, and they knew he's going to be looking through his looking glass, trying to assess the attack, and they're like, okay, well, we're not going to be able to fight this guy off. So what they did is they marched around in formation, and then they would go behind a wall, change their uniforms real quick, and then come out and march around again. So every time they come by, they're come walking by like this and come down, and they look like they're like a different, they look like it's different people. So Bouchard's out there, and after they do this like 3 times or something, he's like, nah, it's too many guys, like 50 dudes in there. It's not worth fighting them for that. So he just sails on. I love that trick worked. It's awesome. Then he goes down to San Juan Capistrano. He lands on Doheny Beach, the same place I learned to surf. That's not important, but it is, I don't know, I have to say it for whatever reason. And again, attacks, he basically brings up the cannons. Again, all the soldiers that are there to protect it just take off. They're like, nope, forget about it. The Spanish soldiers, that was kind of their MO in this, and just totally leave the people they're supposed to protect vulnerable. And then Bouchard's people show up to the mission with a cannon and be like, hey, why don't you just give us everything so we don't have to kill you all with the cannon. And they surrender. The pirates do what pirates do: they rape and pillage and take everything that isn't nailed down. And I guess they made a lot of wine there at San Juan Capistrano, so they were the sort of the wine makers for all of the missions. So all the pirates just got super drunk, and which causing more trouble, of course. And apparently, the next day, Bouchard ended up whipping a number of them for getting too drunk and coming back late. And a number of them, or 2 guys, decided they just didn't want to go back at all. They just said, we're not getting back on the boat, and it disappeared. One was an Englishman, and one was a guy of African descent. The thing is from the Caribbean. And these would be the first Anglo and first African descended residents of California that we know. So I don't know. It's, again, not super important, but worth mentioning a little bit. Okay, so like I said, Spain's hold on their big empire was not sustainable. This was not a tenable situation. And I also said that, their San Francisco settlement, the one that they build Mission Dolores, and the Presidio there is the farthest north that they ever make it. They never go any farther. And from then on out, they're going to start receding. The wave is starting to go back. God damn that cat. So it is worth mentioning why the Spanish Empire is collapsing, how this happens, because they're going to lose, in the Mexican independence movement, when they, when they give up, when Spain surrenders and says like, okay, fine, you're Mexico now, California becomes part of Mexico. So it is worth sort of looking into how the Spanish Empire declined. And it's basically a series of dynastic struggles, for one thing, deciding who's going to be the next king. A number of, different families are fighting for power, very Game of Thrones type stuff going on there. And they get so busy with all of that they're not paying attention. They're like, oh, we've run this great world empire. Who's going to run? They're trying to assassinate each other, and all this political maneuvering, to the degree that nobody's actually running the empire, that they're not paying attention to it. They're only cared about the actual seat of power. So everybody in Spain is sort of just ignoring what's going on in the Americas. And that gets to the second reason. The people who are actually running things, who are living in the Americas, know that nobody's watching them, and they're just making themselves rich. So less money is getting kicked back to Spain as there used to be. There's rampant corruption. Even, from the very beginning, this model had always been about people trying to get rich. And, it's still pretty much that way, later, hundreds of years later. And you have all these sort of local governors that are almost, setting up their own little kingdoms up there and kind of bribing everybody they need to bribe and sending as little back to Spain as they need to. So just sort of rampant corruption is going on. The second thing is, or the third thing is, the British and to a certain extent the French are sort of rising powers. They're getting stronger, and they're able to sort of push the Spanish out. The Spanish and the British fight a big war, and that really hurts the Spanish, and they're not able to ever fully recover from that. So more and more the British are kind of going to be like, the dominant power in the Americas. Finally, it ends in the early 1800s, after the United States becomes the United States and says like, well, North America is ours to do whatever the hell we want with, which was kind of their feeling. Napoleon had conquered Spain in the Napoleonic Wars. I'm not going to go into much detail about this stuff, but basically overthrows the Spanish king and puts in a sort of puppet replacement. He puts in his brother as replacement. And at this point, all of the colonies that had been, all of these colonies that had been in the New World were saying like, wait a minute, like, we had loyalty to the King of Spain. Now this other guy is there. We don't have loyalty to him. So I think it's time that we have independence. They have been already sort of pushing in that direction anyway. It was really just an excuse for the declared independence. So colony after colony, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Peru, all of these sort of separate, will become separate Spanish-speaking countries later on, all have their sort of separate independence movements. Some of them are connected in lots of different ways, but they're fighting a series of wars that Spain can't keep up with. And over the course of just a couple decades, they lose their entire empire. So that's enough of that. All that really matters to us with this is the seat of Spanish power. The Mexico City, was the capital. It was New Spain, and they say, we are no longer New Spain, we are Mexico now. Just the same way the British colonies in North America said, we are no longer part of British colonies, we are the United States of America. Mexico does the same thing. And so, we are now our own country. So along with that is going to come California. Mexico is going to have a rockier road than the United States will. They gained independence in 1821. It is when Spain finally gives up this decade-long war they'd been having. And at first they become the first Mexican empire. There's a Mexican emperor. Then everybody kind of realizes, well, we're done with monarchies. We don't really want to have an emperor. So we're going to be the first Mexican republic takes over. And they're very much going to model themselves after the United States. And we're going to see sort of how that works in the next lecture. They're going to be very, very pro-equality, all kinds of Enlightenment ideals, like separation of church and state. They're going to have all these sort of like great high-minded ideals. That isn't going to necessarily work out in the long run for them either. And over the next 100 years, you have 10 different Mexican governments. There's a number of different Mexican revolutions, some on sort of, great, high ideals to build a better government for the Mexican people. Some other ones are just power grabs by powerful warlords. It kind of just depends. Some are, when you think of General Santa Anna, it's kind of a combination of the two. Are you knocking at the door? Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. Let's put this back up. Like the last 2 minutes of this lecture get interrupted. So yeah, Mexico is going to have a difficult time. But they're very much going to try. We're going to see how they try to model themselves out to be sort of an American republic, and yeah, there really was just a second left of this lecture. But again, that isn't going to mean all that much in California, because the people of California, as we're going to see in the next lecture, consider themselves to be something different anyway. They're going to take down the Spanish flag and put up a Mexican flag, but they don't really care one way or another. They don't consider themselves to be Spanish or Mexican. They call themselves Californios. And we haven't looked much about what life was like outside of the missions, but there was this growing secular society, this whole separate culture that was growing up amongst the Californios. And it's unique, like I said, it's part of Mexico, but it's not Mexican culture. It's definitely sort of California, and they have their own sort of unique traditions, and sort of ways of dress, their own language, their own way of running government, in lots of ways. And a lot of that is very much, they're very mañana culture. They are a very laid back people. They're also quite a bit racist as well. But anyway, we'll pick up that in the next lecture.